On today's Newsmakers, a warning about witchcraft, the truth about persecution, and a look inside Mike Pence's faith. That and more coming up. Welcome to Newsmakers, a show where we go behind the headlines every week to bring you interviews with pastors, entertainers, politicians, and other notable figures. On today's Newsmakers, we begin with Jackie Hill Perry. She is an author and a speaker who has inspired millions with her story of leaving behind a gay lifestyle and finding Jesus. She's now issuing a warning about the occult and also an inspirational calling to us all. Let's welcome Jackie to Newsmakers. So Jackie, your new book, Upon Waking, 60 Daily Reflections to Discover Ourselves and the God We Were Made For. This is a little different from some of your other projects, some of your other book projects. Why did you go the devotional route?
My publisher brought up the idea, and I was a bit cynical about it because even as I say in the introduction, I don't read devotionals. And so it just didn't seem like something that was my cup of tea. But I thought through why I didn't read them. And obviously, a lot of that was because I think it's shallow. I think a lot of them are very self-centered. I think they motivate people in a non-scriptural way. And so it felt like, oh, well, just write what you want to see. And so I just took it as a challenge to create a resource and a work that I think was helpful.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things earlier this year, and I want to talk more about the book, but that you said that really stuck out to me, and I know there were a number of stories about it. You were, talking about, Satan trying to destroy an entire generation, about evil. And I have often found, and I'd love to get your take on this, and I have a feeling, I think I know where you'll go with it, but, a lot of times the church doesn't want to talk about evil or doesn't want to talk about that, Ephesians 6, the fact that we're in the midst of this spiritual battle and how essential it is to understanding that. To me, that points us back to the Lord, right? Like understanding what's going on. I thought it was pretty bold, though, how you spoke up on that and talked about it. So I'd love for you to just reflect on that a little bit.
Yeah, because witches are bold. Witches are very out loud and bold about their rituals and their altars and the means by which they can access the spirit realm independent of Jesus, right? And you have an entire generation that is on TikTok being introduced to these powers and this ability to find strength, to find peace, to find some sort of control over their lives, over their minds, and even over others through supernatural means. And I think we have to talk about it if we love people. Right. You have Paul over here in Ephesus dealing with people, dealing in dark practices. Right. You have Exodus 33, like what the Israelites, that was occultic for them to build a false idol and to worship it. And so for me, I think we have to speak to the fact that people believe that there is power in other dimensions apart from Jesus himself. But Jesus came and said that you cannot worship the Father. You cannot access God if you are not doing it in spirit, by the power of the Spirit, and in truth, according to God's word as revealed in the Son. And so I think if we don't talk about it, then we're leaving a lot of people lost. We can't be scared of the devil. He's defeated, but we also can't be so rational that we think everything is a matter of logic and not also a spiritual reality at play.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I have found over the last couple of years looking at this so troubling is that so many people want to pretend this isn't happening. It's as though Ephesians 6 doesn't exist. This spiritual battle is not happening. And you mentioned, we're distracted, and not every single thing is spiritual. Some things are just bad decisions that, we make in life. But a lot of things are spiritual. A lot of the things we watch on the news, the evil we see, this is very real and it's happening. And, part of, I think, waking up, right, to the God we were made for is recognizing that, right? Understanding that paradigm and how Jesus won, but that we need to be aware of the battle we're in.
That's good. No, that's good. Because Paul would often say that I'm not ignorant of the devil's schemes. And him being aware of his schemes, being aware of the fact that he's crafty, being aware of the fact that he's at play, and even in many of the things that happen in church, I think it set him up to move a certain kind of way. I think sometimes we get caught up in thinking that even what's happening in our churches is just flesh and blood. There's division because people are problematic and people are irritating and people are this. And it's like, yes, it's them, but there's also some dimension behind it that helps us to fight the real enemy. My brother is not my enemy. The enemy is my enemy, right? And so I think even being aware of the devil in that way helps us to treat people in a particular way.
That's smart. That's actually very good. And, you know, you look at this book, right? You look at this devotional and everything we're talking about, right? These struggles with identity that people are having, this culture that tells people, go do whatever you want, whatever you feel, whatever you think. And I think we're watching a lot of people realize that's not so fulfilling, which is why we're seeing baptisms and all these incredible things happen spiritually. But how do you think this book, this devotional, can be helpful to people who might be struggling with identity, even within the church? They're trying to figure out whose they are and where they fit.
That's good. Yeah, man. I think the very fact that I think we don't talk about us being image bearers enough, like what it means to be made in the image of God, what it means to be made to reflect Him, what it means to even be a sinner and need to also be restored as an imager. I think this devotional kind of helps us to see that, because I try to teach about God more than I teach about us. But I think in teaching about the God we were made for, then we understand ourselves more clearly, because we start to understand, whether it's in certain texts about Genesis 1, it's like, oh, if He's the creator, then I'm the creature. So one of my identities is that I'm a created thing, right? Out of that, the implication is that I'm needy, I'm dependent, and I also have a purpose. And my purpose isn't independent of Him. My purpose also hinges on me knowing and loving and serving and honoring Him. And so I think the devotionals lead us in that direction primarily because it lifts up God.
I really appreciate your time today. The book is Upon Waking, 60 Daily Reflections to Discover Ourselves and the God We Were Made For. Jackie, thanks so much.
Thank you.
For more from Jackie Hill Perry, be sure to grab her new devotional, Upon Waking, 60 Daily Reflections to Discover Ourselves and the God We Were Made For. Coming up, we take a closer look at Christian persecution abroad and here in America. This is Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. Our next guest is Jeff King, the president of International Christian Concern. This is a persecution watchdog, and he is going to shed light on the current state of persecution around the world and here in America. Let's welcome Jeff King to the show. Jeff, if you wouldn't mind starting out, telling us a little bit about the mission of International Christian Concern.
Yeah, well, ICC or persecution.org, we have kind of three purposes, and we work for the persecuted church. We serve them around the globe. Three functions: advocacy, awareness, and assistance. Not in that order, but assistance. We are taking care of pastors when they're attacked. If they're murdered, we get their family to a new place in life. We're pushing the gospel out at the toughest places in the world where missionaries don't work. We work on Capitol Hill, so we work with members, we work with the State Department, educating and talking to them about what's happening overseas. And then work like this, just getting the word out, awareness, just making the church aware, as well as the secular media, trying to get them to pay attention to persecution.
Yeah, I mean, you're on the ground, you're providing information, you're really doing everything when it comes to this issue. And this is a massive issue. You have a new report out, the 2023 Persecutors of the Year report. And one of the things that stands out to me, the general fact that you have 200 to 300 million, that's the estimate, Christians around the world who are being persecuted. When you see those figures, I mean, you're familiar with the work, you do the work, but I mean, that is a monumental number. What goes through your heart and your mind as you ponder that massive number of people?
Well, I've been doing this for 20-some years, and that's, a number that's bigger than the populace of Christians in the United States. So just to give people perspective, and, people, a lot of times people want to argue that number, Billy. They could say, maybe it's not that high. And what I would say is, look, you can argue the margin. You can't argue the core of it. And just look at China. You've got 120, 150 million Christians. Look at Nigeria, North Korea. Just start adding them up. So it's very clear that number, whatever it is, we give a range, is pretty accurate. And it ranges from light to the absolute decimation of the church, which is the murder and assassination and torture. But even so, one of the big points I like to make is that, look, what we see the dictators doing overseas to strangle Christianity is the beginning of what we're seeing here in the West. So this is persecution light, nothing heavy. We deal with heavy stuff. But you see the job discrimination, that exclusion from the public square, the silencing, the firing, the court cases. All that stuff is persecution light that goes on overseas that's used to strangle the church, what we're seeing here.
Well, that's a big question, right? Because a lot of people will say, well, Christians in America have nothing to complain about because the persecution that Christians complain about is nothing like what people face in Nigeria or North Korea or China or many other places around the world. But you just raised an interesting point, and I'd love to just focus on that a little bit more for a moment, because all of that deeper persecution around the world, you would imagine it started somewhere else, right? That it didn't start, obviously, where it is now. When you look at the things you just mentioned right now, and you look at where we are in America, there have been some victories in the courts of late. But do you have any fears or worries about maybe where this country could end up if those things aren't kept in check?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to be too alarmist, but what did the Nazis do when they were attacking the Jews? You soften the populace up, and there's a whole lot of negativity that streamed out in terms of media and pop culture. It was painting the Jews a certain way. And I've watched this for 20 years. And I can't tell you how many reports over the years. I'd say, look, the storm clouds are gathering. We can see the storm approaching. And now I'd say the storm is here. So it is persecution light. Make no bones about it. It's still persecution light. But people need to wake up, because we are the frog in the kettle. And if you just follow the trajectory, we need to do something. And I think we need to overturn the tables would be one way to say it. Look at what Jesus did. We are, to the core, we are to love our enemies. We are to not hate. But look, we are in a democracy, and we need to raise our voice. We need to shout, and we need to cry foul when a foul is being perpetrated against us. And it absolutely is.
So absolutely. And I think that is one of the reasons why so many people have been sounding the alarm in America. And, like so many other things, people will dismiss things until they become a very real big problem. And you want to prevent it. You want to stop it from getting to that place. But when it comes to your report, the Persecutors of the Year report, let's talk about that, because a lot is in that report. What were some of the most alarming findings, or you've been doing this a long time, the findings that most stood out to you?
Well, for me, I always go back to Nigeria. Most Americans have no idea what's going on in Nigeria. But imagine this, for the last 20 years, probably up to about 100,000 Christians have been murdered. 3.5 million Christians, their lands have been taken from them. And the government's pretty much done nothing. And so to bring this home, I'd say, let's scale this up to the United States numbers. So in the last 20 years, 400,000 Christians murdered. And then let's say 14 million Christians have lost their homes, and the government can never seem to do anything about it. And so this is where I'm very impolitic, and I speak the truth. And I'm trying to, for a decade now, I've been trying to wake Washington, and a lot of people have come to see this. But the reason hardly anything happens in Nigeria is this, and that's because the radical Islamists, they are embedded in the government, and the Fulanis. They own the organs of state, all the security organs, so the army, the intelligence agency, the police. So strangely, nothing happens. They come to Washington. They say, gosh, this is one tough problem, but these are guerrilla fighters. We're trying. Please give us more money and arms, and maybe we can do something. And I'm like, that doesn't fly. And, if just open your eyes and look at the situation. So that's Nigeria.
Final question for you. When it comes to the Persecutor of the Year report, what are you hoping to accomplish? What is the end goal of that work?
Well, we're just trying to, for one, wake up the church. Persecution is a very tough thing. There's, you see a lot of horror when you have to deal with this ministry, and it's complicated. You think about the issues we discussed today. So what we do is we want to produce a primer, and that is just a teaching aid. And that's for people on the Hill. That's for the media, so they can, get hold of a very complex situation. And we're doing this really day to day with persecution.org. We're putting out news all the time, every day. So to wake, especially the church, but even to go beyond that and to get into secular media, to say, guys, this is so unjust. Look what's going on.
Well, I want to thank you for the time coming on today, breaking this all down for us. And we're looking forward to having you back sometime soon. I know unfortunately, there's no shortage of this, information and persecution to talk about. And we appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You can visit persecution.org for the 2023 Persecutors of the Year report and for more on this important topic. Coming up, our conversation with Mike Pence and his daughter, Charlotte. This is Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. Welcome back to Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. For our final segment, we're sitting down with former Vice President Mike Pence and his daughter, Charlotte Pence Bond. We're going to be talking about their faith, their family, and also their new book, Go Home for Dinner. Let's welcome them to Newsmakers. Mr. Vice President, Charlotte, thank you so much for joining us. A lot to talk about today. Your new book, Go Home for Dinner, which I love that. And the subtitle, Advice on How Faith Makes a Family and Family Makes a Life. Mr. Vice President, why did you could write about any topic in the world. Why tackle family right now?
Well, number one, thanks so much for the good words. It was a couple of years ago that I signed an agreement with a major publisher to write 2 books. And a friend of mine heard about it. And he said, I'm really looking forward to reading your autobiography because I'm interested in history and in public life. But he said, the book I really want to read is how you have a marriage and a family like yours, living the crazy life that you've lived in politics over the last 20 years. And first off, I was humbled by that. And we give God the glory. It's been his grace that's seen us through. But that was the inspiration for Go Home for Dinner, because over the course of our family's life, we've sought to put into practice biblical principles that have strengthened our marriage, strengthened our family. But that simple practice of being there for one another, sitting down around a dinner table is being lost by too many Americans. And we really hope this book encourages people not just to go home for dinner, but to recognize that, as we believe, that faith makes a family and family makes a life.
Yeah, and Charlotte, I want to come to you in just a moment, but I have one other question off of that, because you've held positions that are some of the most powerful positions in the world, and a lot of people struggle in their daily lives, with the jobs they're doing and their families, to hold on to their priorities. What was it at the core that, even as you were serving as vice president, you're serving as a governor, all the things you've done, that continued to sort of keep you in that path of putting your family first? Because most people really do struggle with that, I think.
Well, Billy, it was learned along the way. I came to faith in Jesus Christ as a freshman in college, but even after I was married, I got busy in politics, and as a young married couple, we learned some tough early lessons in politics. But it was really after Charlotte and her brother and sister came along. I remember hearing a sermon that quoted a verse I write about in the book, out of Genesis chapter 18, where God essentially says that his calling for Abraham, as he says, I've chosen him, the seed of the members of his own household, that they would do what is right and just, so that the Lord would fulfill his purpose for him. And it was in that moment, as I write in the book, that I sensed a clear purpose and a calling in my faith. It was whatever I felt called to do in the world. My mission, my calling, was my wife, my kids, and there's a promise in that verse that essentially says that if you make God's priorities your priorities, you put your marriage and your family first, the Lord will fulfill his purpose for you. He's opened doors for us and given us opportunities to serve in ways that we never could have imagined. But the greatest source of joy in our life has been our family, our 3 kids, their spouses, and now our 3 grandchildren. And so I hope this book encourages people to reflect on those same principles.
No, that's incredible. And Charlotte, you getting to work with your parents in the way that you have on different book projects and in other ways, you also are a mom, a wife, you're building your family up. What are some of the big lessons you would say have come from seeing your parents and how they've lived that you're sort of integrating in to how you build your family?
Yeah, I mean, I think just the overall message of the book, especially, is just to be present for your family, not just to be there, but to be mentally present too. We talk about that as well. So, I mean, I think in general, writing this book was really interesting because as my dad and I were working on it, as you said, I became a mom. So I was having to kind of put these into practice at the very time. And, one of them is Give Your Family Sunday. And it can be, maybe another day of the week, but give your family a day of the week where they know that that's for them. And so not working on Sundays was really difficult for this book because my husband was home and could watch my daughter. So I would have, wanted to work on Sundays a lot and had to really be disciplined not to. So things like that, I think just being there for one another. And just remembering that, your family does come first above work and career, even though God will call you to other things, to major roles potentially, and really to any role. I think that you just have to remember that your first calling is with your family. So that's really how we start the book off. And I think that's an important message for a lot of people.
Well, I love that. And the book is Go Home for Dinner, Advice on How Faith Makes a Family and Family Makes a Life. Appreciate both of you giving us so much time today.
Thank you, Billy. Great to be on with you.
It's always interesting to get a chance to sort of look behind the political curtain, to get to know a family for who they are. For more on the Pences, you can go and get their book, Go Home for Dinner, Advice on How Faith Makes a Family and Family Makes a Life. You can grab it wherever books are sold, and we'll be right back with more Newsmakers. That's all for today's Newsmakers. Thank you for watching, and be sure to head over to the CBN News YouTube channel. You can get the full interviews that you saw on today's episode. We'll see you again next week.